I met a Irish mafia enforcer in federal prison. We walked the track together. He told me I got enough bodies to fill those bleachers. There was a guy in my high school who was scary. He was held back a year in high school. Well, more like he was in jail for a year for beating someone up badly. Anyway, I had a couple classes with him, and he was one of those guys who felt zero remorse and did not care or think about consequences. He dated my friend's sister's friend, and they had a falling out. He killed her. First bashed her head in with a rock, and when that didn't kill her, stabbed her until she finally stopped breathing. This was over 20 years ago, and I can still remember the blank look in his eyes when he talked to you. He's getting out of jail soon. Okay, I used to be friends with this girl, and she was interesting. She started stabbing me with her finger, then her pen, then her very sharp pencil. She then said, "I'm going to come to school tomorrow with a knife." She brought a flat-out kitchen knife the next day. She was expelled. One time I was sitting with my friends outside of my high school gym talking about League of Legends, and then an old lady about 50 years old came up to us and asked us if we wanted to play touch football with her kids. 100 yards away from her we saw a running car with the trunk open and nobody inside it. We declined the offer, but she came closer and insisted we come play. We ran. I was walking into the grocery store and saw this really tall man. I was amazed how tall he was, and he caught me staring and growled at me. A complete stranger growled at me. I was riding the subway home from work. An old man walked over to sit next to me. He looked over at me, winked, and whispered through his crusty beard, "I like your neck." Not me, but my brother used to play drums. His teacher was aggressively passionate about his craft. When he was angry, he would mark the rhythm of each song by smacking him on the face. Combine that with death analogies on how to hold a drumstick, and you get some traumatizing lessons. When we were 11, we threw snowballs on buses. We hit pretty often. Drivers knew where we were hiding. On the next day, we were doing the same thing and this driver showed up in a hockey mask and a saw. We ran as little girls crying. Never threw snowballs again. I was at a sleepaway camp, and one night my roommate came back to our dorm way past curfew. He said he needed to take care of something. The next day, we were gathered and told someone was missing. I looked at him, and he had the biggest smile on his face. I avoided contact for the next 2 weeks. A friend's great-grandmother just sat on his porch with a scowl on her face, wrapped up in a shawl, sitting in a rocking chair, chewing tobacco, and she was scary as hell. I'd never heard her say a word. One day, his uncle comes driving up, gets out of the car, and he's white as a ghost, shaking and sweating. Of course, they asked what the hell was wrong. He tells us, "I was at the top of the hill just down the road, and right as I crested the hill, there's a semi in each lane, coming right at me. I had no choice. I just drove right into the ditch, but I managed to maintain control and get back on the road. Scared me to death." We're all comforting him, exclaiming, asking for more details, etc. Just then great-grandma leans forward a bit, spits off the edge of the porch, and says, "That's the difference between you and me. I'd hit that son of a bitch head on." I once went on a tour through San Quentin. For those of you who aren't aware, it's one of California's toughest correctional facilities housing the worst of the worst. While on the tour, the guide told us to stop and get close to the wall because they were transporting someone. 2 guards were walking with an old white male prisoner, looked about 65. While he walked past us he grinned and waved to us, and his presence was just eerie. Even though he appeared to be harmless, you just got the feeling that there is something terribly wrong with him. Something subtle. When they passed, the tour guide said, "Creepy, that guy is a serial killer." I live in a 14-floor building. Once I was going outside to buy some junk food and saw my neighbor walk out the elevator while holding his mouth in pain. I ignored it and got in the elevator. In there I saw 2 teeth and blood on the floor buttons. My mom when she's in a bad mood. I went to a playground thing and crawled into this whale-looking jungle gym. Outside I heard a guy, supposedly drunk, talking to my mum. The only major part I remember of what he did was he looked through one of the open holes of the whale and said, "Oh yes, very pretty, just like." He broke into tears and ran away. Some girl walked out and said, "Don't worry, this is normal. Just ignore it." I never went to that playground ever again. I was at a club and this guy would consistently stand in my eyesight. Whenever I was speaking to anyone he would stand behind them, staring right in my eyes, for about 2 hours. I then saw him leave in a taxi on his own. By the way, I'm a bloke. I interviewed a guy who had cut his grandmother's head off with a bread knife. He was about 5'6" and maybe 110 pounds. Eyes like Shirley Manson. When he said, "I want you out of my cell," I could tell he was fighting back the impulse to attack me. So I left. Once I was at an airport waiting on a bench. A hooded man sat next to me and kept staring at me every now and again. Minutes later, a security guard nodded at the hooded man, as if he was saying, "Do it now." I got up and went away pretending not to be scared. In my grade, there is a loner guy named Kevin who wears hoodies and covers his face all the time, even when it was summer. He always has a grin and keeps his distance, but will stare at you with his stupid grin. And he once sniffed my hair and said, "I love your hair smell. Can I cut a bit of your hair so I can smell it every night before I go to bed?" I switched out of that class. My brother wanted to walk home from school on a very sketchy street because his friend there does too. While we were walking down sketchy land, we came by a man with one arm eating a bag of potato chips. We both stared at each other, and that was when he asked, "Can you pull my zipper up?" That was when we started running. One of the guys I prosecuted for capital murder back when I was a prosecutor decapitated his children. When you looked into his eyes, nothing human looked back at you from them. It wasn't that he was a sociopath. In fact, he was very obviously mentally ill and a long life of abusing drugs had left him less than all there, cognitively. It's just that his eyes were very dead. Not dead in the sense of hopeless or resigned to his fate, but just that nothing that loved light and warmth ever looked out from behind those eyes. And it's not that he scared me, physically. Running into the guy in a dark alley would not be scary. But it scares me that there are people like that out there. Sociopaths and psychopaths I can deal with. I understand them. Psychologically, I see where they fit. But this guy was just something else, like the inversion of a person. Once when I was about 9, I went to the mall with my parents around Christmas time. My mom sees Santa and says, "Why don't you go see him?" I went up, and when I was done he said, "Don't worry kid, I'll be in your bed on Christmas." I ran. There was a weird man sitting 2 seats away from me on the train constantly talking to himself. I assumed he has an earpiece in and used the reflection of the window to look at his other ear. There was nothing there. He never stopped talking, but never looked at anyone in particular. My English teacher who terrified the living shit out of the class by trying to get down with da kids. The one thing you never ever want to hear is your insane teacher shouting, "What up Mardank bros, ready to 420 blaze it and analyze poetry?" I work at a fast food restaurant and we tend to get a lot of interesting customers. One day a man came in and I, being the cashier, went to serve him. He stood at the counter for about 10 seconds without looking at me and then proceeded to run out of the restaurant. Cut to about 2 hours later, I'm cleaning the men's bathrooms when he walks in. I apologize and say that I'll just be a moment to finish up my cleaning. When I went to exit the bathroom with my cleaning supplies, he blocked the doorway and wouldn't let me pass for about 10 seconds again. He then spent half an hour in the bathroom before exiting the store without purchasing anything. An hour later, you guessed it, he's back again, pacing back and forth at the front of the store. He ends up ordering $30 worth of food and, rather than waiting for his order, leaves the store whilst the food is being prepared, never to return. Several weeks later I'm waiting for my bus. I live very close to work. When he sees me, walks up and stands next to me for the 10-minute wait. When the bus finally arrived, he turned around and walked away. As a young woman, this scared the shit out of me, particularly when I drove past him getting arrested a couple of weeks ago, surrounded by police officers. Next episode's question is, What is the dumbest thing you got punished for in school? You can use the link below to submit your answer. The best submissions will appear in next episode.